what I'll do, Shelley, is I'll just, at that point,
I wore purple pants today. I got some new clothes from the consignment shop.
oh, very nice.
Yeah. But these are purple, so black.
Did you get your water?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good.
It's up there cooling down.
Oh, I have to see this.
I got those are purple, but this is green.
Very nice and springy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna assume you have a lot of Zoom people today. Or it's just gorgeous that people are out doing stuff.
Well, then there's several people gone, like Chuck and Kelly.
Chuck and Kelly are.
Well, please give them a hug for me.
Chuck's at a concert, it's that one that was postponed because of the
Right,
weather.
and it's too early this afternoon, that's right.
Right.
That's a new one, that's, you haven't seen that one before.
This one? Oh, I think you saw this side.
Oh, pretty.
This was for the winter solstice, I remember.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have someone, I don't find anything like that?
Well, Josh had this one made for me as a gift, so, but people, I have so many just because
Usually
people
Thursday or Friday.
have given
But there's
them
been
to
some
me
Sunday ones.
over the
There
years.
are some signs out today.
Some of them I've recycled because they were,
Signs out.
as I'm transitioning into the UU, some of them were a little too,
Too many crosses.
yeah, too many crosses. I was gonna try and find a different way of saying it, but. So those have been nutrition, other students at seminary have received.
We've been very polite about your crosses and sacreds and stuff like that.
But the crosses, we have to have a new perspective on it. Yes, in traditional Christian, it means the death, you know, all of that, but it's vertical, alignment with Creator Spirit, and horizontal is our.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's just like, please.
It's not just me, in my opinion.
Alice, it's me and mine. It says how me. Just so we're clear. I get to be
I
second.
say,
I guess I'll have to write a sermon if I
number 389. I'll play through it and we'll sing it twice.
Good morning. I hope everyone is well. Welcome here in this wonderful space and welcome to our online members and guests. We're glad you're here as well. Speaking of glad you're here, Shelley is here today and I'm so glad that she's here with us. This is her third and last sermon in a series, so I'm looking forward to it. I've been able to watch and listen to the others online because I wasn't here those Sundays, but wouldn't miss the last one. So, don't forget, for those of you that might, I don't know that we have any, well, we do have some new people here, but we have a plate in the back for donations. We also take donations online, and we have a jar for change for charity. Alice is standing in today as our chalice lighter and service leader. So thank you so much for that. Chuck and Kelly are gone for that concert that Chuck had postponed because of the weather earlier in the season, so we will miss them. Announcement that's really important because next Sunday is our annual meeting. The first part of that announcement is that please turn your pledge forms into Jim as soon as you possibly can so he can arrange the budget report for the congregational meeting. And if you need a pledge form, Kathy is the person of the hour.
Give it back to me and I will get it to him.
Thank you. You kind of know where he lives or not?
Yeah. I do somehow.
So thank you so much. It's very important to fill out our pledge form so we can plan the budget accordingly. And you heard the whole presentation last week, so I won't regurgitate that. So next week is the annual meeting. We will have some beginnings of it. It won't be like a traditional church service, but we hope that you're here so that we can move forward with our church business and the planning for the next year. It's been a pretty cool time for the last year, and we're looking forward to lots of wonderful things that develop over the course of the next church year. Speaking of that, after next Sunday, we only have 3 more Sundays in the regular church year services. May 5th, which is the first of those 3, Hannah Berazansi, the young lady, a high school student, is going to come and talk to us, and I'm very much looking forward to that. And then May 12th, which is also Mother's Day, Karen Wills, who is part of the UU, the vote, will be here. She's not going to do the presentation, but she is going to talk. She's going to spend some time talking about that. So she'll be here, and then she'll be here after service as well for people that may want to speak with her about that program. And then, of course, May 19th is Music Sunday. So we'll be planning a cool musical rendition of our church culture here. So excited about that. Any other announcements? Yes.
Little one. If anybody is interested in going to Chuck's concert this afternoon, which was so cool last year, lots of choruses come together, and it's at O'Shaughnessy. I'm planning to go, and I'd love to carpool and not drive over there by myself, so let me know.
Thank you. And speaking of just today, if anybody needs to talk to me, please reach out to me, but I'm going to get out of here right after the service because we have another farm to go look at today. So we'll, fingers crossed, it's a slow process, but we'll see. So I'm kind of excited about that. So if you do need to reach out to me, I'm available by email and phone. Anybody else have something to share as far as announcements are concerned? Okay, well, I invite you to take a deep, slow breath and to rid yourself as much as possible of the chaos of the world and of life and all of those things that distract us. Center ourselves in this space and meditate on this musical selection. I invite you now to remain seated and join me in our opening words. We gather in reverence before the wonder of life.
The wonder of this moment.
The wonder of being together, so close, yet so apart.
Each listening in our own secret chamber.
Each listening, each trying to speak.
Yet none fully understanding, none fully understood.
We gather in reverence before all intangible things.
That eyes see not, nor ears can detect, that hands can never touch, that space cannot hold, and time cannot measure.
We gather together acknowledging pain within ourselves and all around the world, from past to present and even into the future.
We know that pain exists in all time and space, both in personal lives as well as in communities throughout the earth.
Despite pain, though, we are called to heal one another in love and support.
As we move forward, may we be healers, even as we endure and engage in healing ourselves.
In the spirit of healing, we light this chalice as a community and say together,
May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers
to heal with love, to help with compassion, to bless with joy,
to serve you, Spirit of freedom, in the fullness of community.
And I invite you now, as you are able, to rise and join me in hymn number 298. 298.
I will play through it first.
Friends, we pause now during our service to acknowledge that we now stand and sit upon the traditional territories of the indigenous people, the Dakota, for whom this very county and congregation are named, and at least 10 other tribes of native people throughout the current borders of the state of Minnesota. Over hundreds of years, native communities across the Americas have demonstrated resilience and resistance in the face of violent efforts to separate them from their land, culture, and each other. Today, indigenous people remain at the forefront of movements to protect Mother Earth and the life it sustains, along with the preservation of their own human cultures and traditions. We acknowledge that it is critical to be an active part of public intervention, taking necessary steps toward honoring indigenous communities and enacting the much larger project of decolonialization and reconciliation. May this weekly acknowledgement be not only a reminder, but even more so an inspirational call to action to work to ensure whatever reparations are possible be carried out through this ancient holy land we all now call home. This is the time during our service when we invite you forward, as you are moved to do so, to share a joy and or concern and light a candle. And I will light a final candle at the end for all of those unspoken joys and concerns.
Lighting a candle today for the joy of connection. So you folks already know that I love coming here. It always feels great. And then my dear friend Chris is from Montana, and she has come in, and another one of our friends who's coming from Hawaii will be joining us. And so just for connections that keep our heart going.
Well, seeing none other, I will now light a final candle for all those joys and concerns that remain unspoken. May we know that whatever befalls us in life, we are held in the loving embrace of this community. And now we say together, for all of these joys and concerns, both spoken and unspoken,
We hold you in our hearts.
it's now my sincere pleasure to turn the service over to Shelley.
And at this time, Bob is going to come and read. You're going to undo the bottom latch there, Bob.
That's okay. From Anne Frank. I can feel the suffering of millions, and yet if I look up into the heavens, I think it will all come right, and that this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. In the meantime, I must uphold my ideals, for perhaps the time will come when I shall be able to carry them out. From Kyle Johnson. A dark tree line against a light gray sky, mystery of the universe. You, who some think of not as a being among other beings, but as the very ground of being itself, thank you for this day, for another sunrise, another chance for us to witness the wonder of creation. We know that yours is a creation that is truly double-edged, a yin-yang universe. For it is indeed one in which the life-giving flame can also burn. But it is also one in which the dark, cold, misting rain gives rebirth to spring. And it is one in which, paradoxically, our acquaintance with pain and sorrow can help us better appreciate pleasure and joy. Help us then to have the courage and strength to embrace it all, to embrace what is. Help us. We who are similarly double-edged, whose love for those closest to us can so easily provoke our own tribal instincts and prejudices, whose own pain, rather than fostering empathy and compassion, may turn us inward to dig moats, to build walls, rather than bridges. So help us to embrace this double-edged yin-yang universe with courage and strength. But above all, help us to do so in a spirit of love and compassion. For this, it seems, is our eternal challenge. And it is also the wellspring of our eternal salvation.
So, excuse me, first I have to say again, it is just a delight to be here. I'm always so glad to be here. I was saying to Bob that I first came to preach at Dakota back when I was in seminary. That was way back before 1995. So I've had a long history with this congregation. And excuse me, and you folks are very, very dear to me. I would like to commend you on bringing in Pastor Brian. He has not asked me to say anything. He has not paid me. However, when you have your business meeting tomorrow, you might bring out this little snippet of a recording. Fabulous job bringing in this man, this minister. I know in the past you've hired folks, often seminary students, to come in and provide some consistent leadership and preaching, and they've done a nice job. But I know a whole lot is happening here. And I think that's because you've brought in an experienced, polished minister who has an awful lot to give and an awful lot of passion. And so I am delighted that you folks have found each other. And I do hope that you'll continue to have guest speakers once in a while, because I'd like to keep coming out. But hooray for you all. So, and now that the commercial's done, on to our regular sermon. I look forward, Brian, to hearing about more about what you're doing here. This is just way cool. Most of you know that I've spent my life primarily being a chaplain, and I spent about 6 weeks with 2 different families in our ICU waiting room. A young man had come to the hospital under his own power and brought into the emergency room. He was settled into an ICU bed, and he never got out of that bed. He was just a delightful young man. He had a young wife, a couple young kids. His parents lived in town, and her parents lived in town. And he developed something called ARDS, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome. And it's in response to an illness or an injury that fluid fills up the tiny air sacs in the lungs, making breathing very difficult. And ultimately, it often becomes impossible. Well, myself and the other chaplaincy staff ended up walking this really fine line between these 2 families. The young man's parents were very mature in their mainline Christian faith, and it was tearing them up to watch their son decline. They struggled, and they were holding on to the hope that he might recover, might recover. He was young and strong, and there was a chance. And his family was trusting that God was with them in the middle of all this, and that whatever happened, God would be with them. His in-laws belonged to a large non-denominational evangelical church. And they were praying very hard and believing that there would be a miracle and that God would heal this young man. They just needed to pray hard enough, and they needed to stay positive. And it became a real agonizing situation, certainly for the families and definitely for the staff. So even though the parents were there, the wife was considered the next of kin and her parents. And the staff had to defer to them. But on one hand, we have the parents who are there every day for their son. And we have the other family who is there every day for their daughter. The daughter's parents did not want anything to do with the son's parents because they thought it was negative, thinking that, acknowledging that he could die. They just didn't want any part of that bad vibe. It was important to them that they stay positive. They didn't want to bring in any doubt. And his parents started to feel shamed, being judged for acknowledging that he could be lost. And that if he did die, God would still be there, but it certainly wasn't what they wanted. And so our waiting room just became like a divided war zone. And the two sides just didn't even communicate or support each other. And it was sad because these two deeply religious families were relying on their faith in an impossible situation. And each family's beliefs were helping them, and yet making it harder on other people. So religion brought comfort and encouragement, and at the same time, it brought estrangement and confusion. So who is to say when belief makes a difficult time harder? This morning is our third and final sermon in our series on pain. We started with the problem of pain, looking at our theological, cultural, and personal difficulties regarding pain. And then we examined the backward gifts that come out of pain when we looked at the purpose of pain. And today we're going to talk about pain and religion. And that's a really broad topic for just one sermon, but I'm going to do my best to at least give you a big overview. And let me say right now that I'm going to use words like faith and religion and believer. This is going to be the big, broad brushstrokes. So I'm not talking about any particular one faith, and I'm not talking about any particular people. I'm talking about religious people, religious believers. So it is really the big umbrella stroke today. Religion is a double-edged sword. History is replete with stories of persecution and wars and perverse political partnerships and atrocities done in the name of religion. And equally, there are tales of improved lives and mended bodies and advanced communities brought about by religion. And pain is a great conundrum. There is no easy way to wrap our minds around the benefits and burdens attached to distress and hardship. So the relationship and the interaction between these two double-edged swords, it just actually makes this great Gordian knot. Richard Rice, writes, "The experience of suffering presents us with a number of perplexing paradoxes. Say that 5 times fast. For most of human history, disease and death were part of everyday experience. People faced pain throughout life and did their best to cope with it, and then moved on. Ironically, however, the more effective our attempts have been to resist disease and death, the more perplexing they seem to be. So now, thanks to medical science, people suffer much less in life than they would have in the past, yet they're more upset by it than before. The less we have to suffer, it seems, the more our suffering bothers us. And then Dr. J. Unger notes, before the advent of modern pain management interventions, pain was seen as a natural part of life, carrying various religious, cultural, and societal meanings. And it was argued that when ether and chloroform were introduced into obstetrics in the 19th century, pain became a medical matter, and that it lost much of its spiritual meaning in the medical community. Initially, there was a lot of blowback about using anesthesia in childbirth because some folks thought, wait a minute, you are depriving women of this pain that God has given to them in response to original sin. So the pain of childbirth, you're depriving them of that. How dare you? Fortunately, the Western Christian Church had a very strong voice about any time that we can lessen pain, that's a good thing. So instead of saying, no, women really should suffer, they at least did not push that agenda. But things do get a little tricky, because on one hand, we're told that medicine's a gift from the divine, and that anytime a malady can be lessened, we should follow the doctor's orders. And there are other times when we're told that pain is the will of God, or the universe, life, and that we kind of just need to struggle with it and deal with it and learn. One of the reasons I left my former denomination was that I had been instructed that when a woman would approach me and she was in a domestic violence situation, my job was to tell her that she needed to stay because that was her duty, and the husband was over the wife and she needed to just accept it. I could not in good conscience perpetuate that type of pain. I needed to step away from that. But there are some big differences in the way religions look at pain. And not only are there differences in the way religions look at pain, but also between liberal and fundamental religions. It's interesting to note that a liberal branch of any particular religion has more in common with the liberal branch of any other religion than it has in common with the fundamental group of the same faith. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, you're following with me. All right. So I just want to run through really quickly some of the, it's simplified, but here are kind of world religions and their basic take on pain, okay? So for Hinduism, the cause of discomfort and misfortune is karma. People's misdeeds they result in a just and appropriate payback. Karma is not punishment. It's a natural consequence. And it's a justice system that balances out the good and the bad. Avoiding the consequence of karma just puts off the inevitable. So it's the duty of the person bearing the pain to just accept the karma and try to do better in the future. The Buddhists have the thought that clinging to something, not wanting change, not being willing to let go, having desire in and of itself, these are the things that cause pain. And the more that one is able to let go, accept change, release what is impermanent, the less pain that there will be. Muslims start with the understanding that everything that happens comes about because of the will of Allah, and since Islam means to submit, it follows that the believer should submit to whatever Allah places on their life, and that trusting that Allah has a purpose for each ache and wound makes submitting more bearable. Christianity is pretty mixed. So on one hand, the Christians obligated to accept whatever discipline the Almighty lays upon them. And there's also the expectation that the blessings of God would bring freedom from undue hardship and distress. And Judaism has that same sort of blended attitude toward affliction. There's an awful lot in Jewish humor and story that carries an element of guilt and martyrdom. But underneath that belief is that devoted worship to the divine should ultimately bring one to the land of milk and honey. New Age religion has the belief that before souls come onto the earth, they decide what they want to learn. And then they come to this earth, and the things that they encounter, the struggles, those are there that teach them the lesson. And you don't get through the pain until you learn the lesson. So if you're still hurting, you haven't learned the lesson. Pagans generally accept that pain and suffering are part of life, and they should be honorable while dealing with them. But it's okay to call in various spirits and gods and use magic and spells and rituals trying to lessen and deal with these upsets and promote healing. Native American and African religious groups have very different understandings regarding the adversities of life. For some, it has to do with malignant spirits or an individual being out of balance. For others, trials and tribulations are a natural part of life. But either way, there is no prohibition against seeking remedies for troubles. So that's just a super basic look at how one's theology would impact how one would just approach pain in general. We have, in addition to that, our Northwestern worldviews. So as our society becomes less homogeneous and our knowledge increases about health and pain management, culture adds an increasingly directive voice about burdensome situations. It's harder to swallow the idea of learning from your pain than it is to swallow Excedrin migraine pills. And it's harder to stomach the idea of karma than to take Pepto-Bismol or Tums. Society in general doesn't like pain and tends to censor it and censor people who are in pain. So on top of our theology around pain, we also are in a culture that just doesn't know what to do with people who are hurting. So at the speed of light, I want to talk to you about 4 different things about pain. Pain that is caused by religion, pain that is helped by religion, pain that is healed by religion, and pain that is endured by religion. Think we can do that really fast? Mm-hmm. This could be like a whole book, couldn't it? I could just go on and on and on. But we do know, pardon the kind of pun here for those of us that are theists, but religion is responsible for an ungodly amount of pain and suffering. And we know that. Waging war, persecuting faiths, colonialism. I remember the stories about when Christians might come into an area that had a lot of Jewish people, and the Jews would be forced to accept Christ on penalty of death. When they did, they would be baptized. And while they were being baptized, they would be held under the water until they didn't struggle anymore, so that they didn't have to worry about them recanting their new belief in Christ. All of you know stories and stories and stories and stories, whether it's around Christianity or other faiths. It seems that in so many cases, religion done badly just ripples out and causes so much awful stuff. The sexual abuse of children by priests is particularly insidious. And religious history is painful to read. It's impossible to reconcile communities that preach peace and hospitality to the stranger with the stories of the missionaries who extinguished native populations. It's hard to put those together. In a less direct manner, the teachings of religion has often brought severe and lasting torment to millions. So this is the suffering caused by theology. So texts that declare that women must be submissive to their own husbands, or must have their bodies completely veiled and must stay hidden, or must have a male relative be in charge of them at all times. The dichotomy that the spirit is good and the body is bad. The suggestion that two people of the same sex that love each other is anathema. We have all these theologies that teach people to hate themselves or to hate others. And every one of you in this room could probably talk personally about ways that theology may have harmed you, or certainly harmed people that you love. So we know that religion can cause a lot of pain. It's brought home on a smaller scale when there's religious trauma or religious abuse. And I encountered this often as I was a chaplain when I would go in to see somebody, and in cases where perhaps religion had just really been shoved down someone's throat, or they had been told how horrible they were and unacceptable they were within religion. Or when the nurse holding the pain pill would ask the patient, "Do you want me to pray for you?" What are they going to say? That would be religious abuse. Or at the homeless shelter where I used to work, where the residents that came to the homeless shelter had to listen to the sermon before they could have the bowl of soup. So belief, when it's forced on vulnerable people, including children, it's a spiritual violation. And when religion has harsh teachings about personal worth, one's body, sexuality, and one's role in life, it becomes religious trauma. And when the message and the method are damaging, the spiritual wound is deep. The good news is that there can also be spiritual healing. It often takes some work and some intentionality, but it absolutely can happen. People can be healed. Besides direct attacks and harmful teaching, religion can cause pain by passively discouraging growth. So Karl Marx, and religion is the opiate of the masses. The idea that you should just accept whatever it is that you're given, deal with it in this life, because then in the next life, you get the good stuff. So you don't need to do social justice work here now, because later on you'll be rewarded. Or those who are told that it's God's will for them to submit to something that clearly is wrong, that is God's plan for them. Or that certain things are just a test from God and it's their job to endure rather than bring about the changes that are needed. And religion can also stymie just personal growth, so not just that of society, but personal growth. I've talked in here before about James Fowler, who was a theologian and a psychologist who came about, who talked about 6 different stages of spiritual growth. And the sad fact is, at least within America, not just Christianity, we prefer to keep our folks at about the 3rd level of spiritual growth because you're easier to handle and you give more money. But if the ministers or imams or leaders encourage people to go through the difficult work of deconstructing their faith and really struggling with what do they believe, and they come out on the other side and often still stay in the congregation, they're much firmer and they're much more solid in their faith, but you can't manipulate them. They will not be on a committee no matter how hard you try and force it. So it's easier just to kind of keep them at stage 3. When religion is the source of angst, it's difficult to comprehend how something that touts its goodness and proclaims to be beneficial can also be so evil. And the terrible cutting by this religious sword happens by means of direct destruction, by teaching theology with toxic consequences, by violating spiritual boundaries, discouraging personal and collective and social growth. Was that uplifting? Now we'll do our pledge. So we don't usually talk in church about the evils of religion, which means I want to talk a little bit about how religion is good. There are amazing ways that faith does make a difference in the way people live and what happens in their lives. About 35 years ago, people started to study religion and spirituality. And at first, everyone was just horrified. You can't put God in a petri dish. Oh my goodness, they were so upset. Until they started finding out these really great results. And then it became a lot more acceptable. There are studies upon studies upon studies about the benefits of spirituality, faith, religious communities, belief. Oh my goodness. So just one study. I'll geek out on this all afternoon. This was done with a number of Roman Catholics and also a number of folks that were non-religious. And they were given electric shocks. And the electric shocks were calibrated so that the person could stand to 80% of what the person could stand as their maximum tolerance. So that's how much their shock is going to be. And they're shown one of 2 pictures. So the first is a picture of Mother Mary, the Madonna, and the second is Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine. So they would have folks look at these pictures for 30 seconds. They would then shock them for 12, People will be asked to rate their pain, and at the same time, they're also doing the brain scans to see what happens. So, what is fascinating is that the Roman Catholic participants felt 12% less pain after seeing the Virgin Mary, and their scans revealed that that part of the brain that suppresses reactions to threatening situations, the ventrolateral prenatal cortex, prefrontal cortex, excuse me, that lit up when they were shown the Madonna picture. Brain scans showing that their faith actually helps their pain lessen in real time. The fact that these tests are based on observable, empirical, reproducible, measurable evidence and is subject to the laws of reason makes this to me even more exciting. And I think as a UU, I just love this stuff because I can do religion and science and it's absolutely fine. But these studies have actually been a great help for me when I have been working in the hospitals, when I've approached the administrators to say, I need more staff. Because chaplains don't make money, but we save a ton of money. And one of it actually is on pain meds. So after chaplains are in visiting with people, they often need less pain meds, less anxiety meds. The families are calmer and the staff doesn't have to spend as much time with them. There's just so much evidence that faith and belief actually do help people manage and lessen real pain. So if faith and spiritual practice can make these difficulties more tolerable, there are times also when spirituality is the only medicine that will work. There are instances of what I call spiritual pain. And if someone is dealing with shame, secrets, guilt, oh my goodness, all sorts of stuff, it doesn't matter how many meds they take. They need to have their pain addressed from a spiritual perspective, whether that be with a chaplain or a shaman. And spiritual care practitioners make assessments, provide counseling, assign homework, address concerns of forgiveness and reconciliation, hope and shame and secrets. I used to occasionally assign damn it dolls to help people deal with anger. And I would get back the best reports and also less physical pain. But often when people would take their damn it doll and run over it several times in the driveway while thinking about whatever it was that was making them so bad, that had the best results of all. And you know what? The pain meds didn't touch some of that stuff. And I'm cutting this kind of short because I could go on and on and on. But there are times when direct spiritual care is the only way to address certain kinds of pain. The last area that we're going to look at is where pain and belief overlap. And this is of distressing religious rituals and rites. Of all the varieties of religious experiences, there's this continuum. And some people might fast for a meal, and some people might fast for a day, and some people might fast for a month. but there's a continuum. And people will intentionally set themselves up to encounter hardship and pain for spiritual and religious reasons. And that is across the board for faith. Some of these are pretty disturbing rites. They're very extreme rituals. I mean, this is past like the hair shirts or the pilgrimages or the self-flagellation with ropes. These are acts of worship that involve endurance and blood and violence that's done to the body. Don't know if I can say this correctly. The Thaupung Hindu festival in Malaysia, the Urs festival in Pakistan, the Native American Sundance, the rite of the Bantetti, and the literal crucifixions in the Philippines on Good Friday are just some of the rituals that people will involve in that are really pretty horrific. One of these involves using a knife that's put behind the eye and they pop their eyeballs out. Yeah, in the name of religion. Ew. Ew. But for the purpose of the sermon, there's two things that are important to note. And the first is that people come to witness these rites and to participate in them, and they are changed. So they come and they see these horrible, gruesome acts, and they go away kinder, more generous, more patient, more loving. They will hook heart monitors up to people, and they will find that the community, their hearts start synchronizing. And in the one of the studies, you could tell who the family members were of the participant that was walking across the coals of the fire, because that person's heart monitor was beating at exactly the same as the rate of that person's family. They just synced up that much when they were doing those religious rites. So just by looking at the monitors. And not only do these rituals strengthen religious community relationships, they also provide benefits to the worshiper. So pain that is self-selected enhances feelings of control and calm. And these acts of reverence and sacrifice can bestow feelings of cleansing and hope and equilibrium and self-possession. Now, it's not the same as when, say, folks with various disorders might do self-cutting or self-injury, although they will say that that provides them some relief. The relief experienced by the folks doing these violent, painful acts experience some pretty significant and lasting changes, even though it's pretty awful stuff. But when pain is chosen and administered by an individual is paired intentionally with higher spiritual values, there's an impressive alchemy. A dangerous stunt or a difficult feat becomes an act of worship and renewal for the participant as well as for the supporters. So this sermon series on pain has led us to some really unexpected conclusions. Pain itself is not our problem. It's how we think about it and try to escape it that gets in our way. Pain carries many benefits, and our world would actually be more dangerous, and we would be smaller, shallower people if we did not heed the wisdom of pain. Pain has a number of positive purposes in our life. And finally, pain and religion, these double-edged swords, are intertwined. And it's true, spirituality has been used and misused and caused harm, but it's equally true that spirituality, well applied, can ease pain and reduce harm. They're double-edged swords, they cut both ways. True religion and philosophy acknowledge that every living being suffers arrows and wounds. Everything deals with pain and limitations just because they're alive. But in closing, I want to remind you of these words by Richard Rohr. Spirituality is always, eventually, about what you do with your pain. May your pain resolve into your deepest blessings. Amen and amen. So take a deep breath. That was a lot to throw at you. And I'm aware of the time. So, folks, we need to decide if you want to have a time to do some dialogue. Do we need to wrap it up?
I'm going to play something though first.
Okay. You can all decide after that.
This is, by the way, called Reflections, and it's by Thelonious Monk. He played beautiful music, jazz piano player, but he couldn't read a note. That's cute.
Let's have it very, very brief. But part of our theology is that the person who stands behind the pulpit is not the only one with wisdom. And you folks know a lot about pain and spirituality. So let's take a moment or two just to hear your thoughts. Thank you, Brian. Godspeed with the farm.
Yeah.
Bye, Josh.
I just finished reading a story by Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
It takes place in the mid-1800s, where this very prominent judge gets injured and through a long period, falls into excruciating pain and ultimately dies from it. And it doesn't seem like religion impinges on the story much. A lot of it has to do with his confusion of what's going on and what's going on with his family and everyone around him. I guess I have nothing profound to say, except I'll have to think more about how that story might fit into everything you said today. Because it was really an interesting perspective of someone who's going through that, doesn't really get any help from religion or family or other stuff. So anyway, it'd be a very interesting short story, I think, for you to read and see how that, Tolstoy's idea of his dying of this excruciating pain and the effect it has on everyone, fits into, gives a sermon to everything you've talked about today.
I will look into that.
Yeah, it's kind of a long one, but it really grips you, all the characters and what's going on. He has a very good way of painting and developing characters. That's, I think, more than most authors.
There's a reason he's still read.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What was that quote about pain and spirituality? It was right at the end.
The very end. So this is by Richard Rohr. Spirituality is always eventually about what you do with your pain.
I've always gone with the mind over matter. That's a big thing that we did back in high school with our wrestling team. We got injured a lot. So it was always mind over matter, because if you don't mind, it doesn't matter.
Or you better not look like it matters,
Right.
maybe. Maybe. Yeah, it would not be all right to be injured, would it? Mm-mm.
Especially young people.
No, yeah, as we're young. And we don't do so well with it even as folks age.
We get practice though.
Other thoughts? Yeah.
I can't help but think that the tattooing craze has something to do with, it's painful. And it must be somehow cathartic. Some people.
That's interesting.
We often seek out pain.
Unconsciously, probably.
Consciously and unconsciously. And I know for physical therapy, a lot of folks have talked about using the pain as something to push against for healing. Yeah, Chris.
I see that a fear of pain, and to me, a lot of times pain is a message from our body or our mind that something's wrong. We have to change something. But too many times, instead of trying to figure out what is this, it's just like, oh, I got to take care of it, make it stop, and you never actually work through the exercise of, well, wait, where is this coming from? I need to do something differently. You just instead make it go away.
So not looking at what's the cause, but it's just a symptom and deal with it. When there's important information that we just miss. I'd agree.
I'm trying to think, how religion affects pain, and well, what is religion? I'm still not quite sure. And I mean, one thing I know that religion does is give us meaning for things. I mean, what does this mean? What is the significance of this? And just in my own experience of pain, I've always just been sort of like, keep the pharmaceuticals at bay. I don't want to use them any more than I have to. And so it was like that in childbirth. It's like, let's just see how far I can go before we say drugs. And but I was really surprised and interested that the pain of childbirth was intense, but it wasn't like any other pain. And I realized afterwards, because it had the meaning. I mean, you say pain usually says something's wrong with your body, and so you go, But the pain of childbirth, they're like, oh, things are right. Things are going on. This is what's supposed to happen. A good thing is happening. And it just changed the meaning. And so it was much more bearable than other types of pain where something's going wrong. I'm being hurt, you know? Anyways.
That's fabulous.
So yeah, I mean, maybe it's religion, because religion is meaning.
Well, and I think of how many, like when I would see some Catholic patients and they would say, I need to turn my suffering over to Jesus, or I need to suffer as Christ did. And so they would attach to Christ in their own suffering, and it made a difference in their pain.
Yeah.
I didn't like the idea of suffering for Christ. That didn't appeal to me, but it worked for them.
I have to say that the whole practically basis of Catholic religion is pain and offering it up and and then I can't help but go think of the person that lit themselves on fire this week,
Yeah.
and obviously the person was in a tremendous amount of pain, and they figured maybe they would do something about it.
So intentionally bringing about their own pain and trying to do a message.
Yeah.
And we all noticed, didn't we? We all
Yeah.
noticed. Yeah.
We don't know what the message was.
No, we don't. That's.
I heard on the news during Easter time, this man every year gets crucified. Yeah.
Yeah, in the Philippines especially, it's the full crucifixion. It's not. It's not pretend. It's the whole deal.
The whole point of the crucifixion is to redeem our sins, right? And so if you renew that, either with yourself in the being crucified, or else watching somebody else do it, it redeems your sins again, or strengthens that whole thing. I don't know.
It's watching these folks carry their crosses up the hill and do the whole thing. These are now tourist attractions. And these other ones that I mentioned are tourist attractions. And yet people get changed. Well, if I've given you something to think about then I've been a good UU preacher today.
We're going to sing a hymn, if that's okay at this point. 145.
Okay, and then I'll do the closing, or the sending, and I'll post 145.
I'll play through it.
Please stand as you are able.
As tranquil streams that meet and merge and flow as one to seek the sea, our King
us move into the coming week with the sure knowledge that our faith is sturdy enough to hold our heartache and troubles, that our religion is broad enough to support any distress that matters, and that our spiritual community promises that we do not have to carry our pain alone. Blessed be. Bless you. Thank you all, folks. Blessed be.
It's from that really, really famous album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There again, I just don't have the hands that Brubeck had to
Yeah.
play. Yeah, it's huge chords, gigantic chords.
Yeah, there's a track on that album.
There you go.
It's about the drummer.
Pretty good.
And it became this
Defender of religion.
Time out.
Time out, yeah. Last week I played, I played the 11/4. It wasn't, it was Martin Luther King.
Base human impulses to control other people. And they don't listen to Christian works, I can use that.
And of course, I don't take five.
It's worth it. What?
I know, I don't.
Human beings are like that.
I mean, I think
Yeah. I'd say that
there are
the
some
one you
theology I
run
think that is
is
actually
a very
harmful.
unusual
It's
thing.
2 plus 2 plus
And
4.
it-
Yep, 9/8.
So, women shut up.
Yeah.
Women speak. I mean, there's some teachings that come from a cultural context that are passed down in Holy Texts that do cause.
Yeah, there's that.
That one.
Nobody expected this album to be a big deal.
Well, it's very accented, it's this. It's 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3.
It's got a big drum solo.
Yeah, it's not. It's like 4. Yeah, there's
Not just
your 4.
one they accept.
Yeah, 9/8 would be a 4.
To actually look at this and say,
So I know it gets complex with these.
in a way
You know, 11, yeah.
So that's how we like to rise. So it kind of applies like.
5 is 5/4.
But it's interesting, it's that style.
That was just a great way. I I think I have an album by him.
What would be the result?
Yeah, I really liked his music.
So
I
I
like
actually
playing it, but
think
then
religion
you
itself
gotta have
caused
Yeah.
So I understand it basically as
Seriously.
a philosophy,
So,
a belief system. So to me, an atheist is religious just as much as
but I,
Rob, did you wanna,
Catholic is
did you guys?
but this guy.
So that system,
Okay.
And he did.
And then you can go home.
Yeah.
it also can, I mean,
So.
Imagine what it would have been like
Unless you wanna mess with it.
one of the places where these people
somebody
were
less damaged
in
than
their
others.
50s, and they were Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane, and all these things were happening.
I know.
So that, I mean, you know, I suppose there are some that say religion has to have God as a system, because then we live in a religion.
Loves of Crane, and we're to actually, hear Billie Holiday in a little club.
And humanism.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Amazing, yeah.
And we are,
I've heard, I've never heard Miles Davis live,
Oh, yeah, Miles Davis, yeah.
but, my sister paid a bought it too.
they taught me, must be true.
And I think it was and she got to the
I
concert,
do
and
also
waiting,
believe
you know, for him to come out.
that
And
probably 90%
he wasn't in a
of
good
where
mood.
religion causes harm,
And he
it
came out
is
late.
in this
He
house.
came out with his
So
horn,
I think
he's still there,
it's a small percentage
his horn up
of
in that.
religion
If you have
and
it
walking
all
on.
over your arm.
One note, that's it.
I don't think most of it is somebody's trying to
For a while there, his band included Chick Corea and Keith Jarrett.
Wow.
They were both in his band.
Yeah.
And
This is fun though to do. This is
Yeah.
really,
Take, you know, every belief system, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. So just take the belief system and sort them into
Anyway, Keith Jarrett had to play an electronic instrument.